500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die.
G'day everyone, this is X-Band, the Phantom podcast, and we are the Chronicle Chamber team. My name is Dan Fraser, I'm joined by Jermayn Parker. How are you, Jerm?
Oh mate, it's good to talk Phantom, and this is going to be a fun night with a great comic.
Absolutely. Steve is not joining us tonight. Sorry, Steve. I hope you're having a good time, and unfortunately, I know you really wanted to talk about the 75th anniversary comic, and you know, to get straight into it, that's what we're talking about. So I hope everything's going all right for you, Steve, and we'll join you on the next podcast. Look, as I said, we are the Chronicle Chamber team, and our website is chroniclechamber.com. And you can subscribe to this podcast via YouTube or Spotify or your iTunes or however you're listening to this, whatever your podcast app is. Don't forget to give us a rating on that podcast if you can, and tell a mate about us as well. This is episode 260, and one I've been looking forward to ever since I heard that this was a thing, or realised that the 75th year of Frew was coming, and we were getting a 75th anniversary comic. And tonight we're going to review that comic. It's Frew issue 1952. It's a bumper issue, 180 pages. It's full colour, which is really exciting. We haven't had, I don't think we've had in the regular series a colour comic as long as that. Trade paperbacks, of course, but regular series, not sure. And look, this is worthy of a podcast all in its own, Germ, and that was never in doubt. We weren't going to try and shoehorn this into a comics and news. We want to talk about this comic as a standalone, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Look, our comics and news are long enough when we're reviewing 2 or 3 36-page free comics. Can you imagine if we tried to fit that in?
Not a chance. Now, we promise we're not going to go too long while we talk about this little ripper. But, well, we promise lots of things. Anyway, we'll try and keep it as punchy as we can. We've said that. Punchy, snappy, let's rip through it. But, of course, I am talking about, as I said, Frew issue 1952, the 75th anniversary comic. Germ, what was your first reaction when you... Not when you saw the cover image, because we had some little previews, but your first reaction when you picked up a hard copy of this, how'd you go?
It stood out on the newsagent shelf. And I know you did as well. Our subscriber copies did not arrive in time, and we didn't want to wait. Even if it meant we had to fork out $25, but it stood out. Like, I'll walk down the aisle and bam, it smacked me in the eyes, in the face, and it's like, it's there. You know, I didn't have to look to see if it was there. Like, you know, like normally when you go buy a comic, you go, oh, is it there? Yes, no, straight away. It was bright purple, bright red with the top mask bit, you know, across the fold. This is what sticks out on the shelf. Yep. You know, it was right there. And yeah, and when I picked it up, it's like, oh, this is thick. The cover's thick. The paper's not glossy paper, but the paper's thick. It weighs, you know, it's got a good weight to it. It's got a nice little shine to the cover as well. Your pizza or your pasta sauce that drips on the front cover will wipe straight off, which will be good.
Your reading copy, not your collecting copy, because you're right. I went to my subscriber copy. It did arrive on time, but the day that it was due, there were messages going around that, mine didn't arrive. And so I panicked and bought one on the way home just in case. And it was waiting for me when I got home. So not all subscribers were left hanging. It's a really good point you make about the way it would sit on a shelf. There's been a bit of criticism I've seen about the big 75 in the background there, but sitting on a shelf, you don't see that. It's a really good point you make. When I went to the newsagent myself, my newsagent's sitting flat on a shelf, not up like that. I went in at 5:25 just before it shut, and this was the only copy that was sitting on the shelf. And when I bought it, I said, "Hey, is that the last copy? Do you have others out the back?" And it was interesting. The newsagent, who was the owner, said no, it was the last copy, and they'd sold out in the day that it arrived. She'd been really worried that morning because so many of them had turned up, and it was a bigger book and a bigger price, and $25 sticker price, you've already said, is not cheap for a regular comic, and she was really worried. But they'd all gone, and she rang up the other branch in town, her other store in town. They had been delivered 12 copies that morning and were already sold out as well. So that's a little retail story from Toowoomba. Turns out the Phantom must be pretty hot property still. She actually asked, has that been advertised or something? Because she didn't know anything about it, but it had flown off the shelves. So whatever advertising got out there, which was, I guess, the preview in the message from the publisher in the previous one, as much as anything, seems to have done the trick in my neck of the woods anyway.
Yeah. Look, I got there pretty early. I think I got there at about 8:39 local time. So there was still plenty of copies there, but they did order extra copies, and normally they only order 2 or 3 copies of every issue, but there was about 5, 6, maybe 10 copies there. So yeah. I don't know. I know newsagents do get. Well, I know they used to. They used to get like a little previews magazine. So I'm not sure if there was a note in there or anything like that.
I don't think so with newsagents these days. I think they just have a pretty standing order from the. Is Gordon Gotch still doing these? I've never even.
It's a different name, but it's the same company as Gordon Gotch, but they've got like a new name which is called R Direct. ARE right. Direct. So it's the same company that's been renamed, because I saw that once and I thought, oh, that's something different.
Okay.
So obviously we've got the stories, right? We do want to go through the stories, but we're just going to kind of go over it as a bit of an overview, I guess, at the first. So
before we do that, can I ask you, and it feeds into the overview, but we talk about the cover. The last Phantom comic that was like this anniversary like that I can recall, and this is a question without notice. This is not on the run sheet. I'm just throwing this up at Jam for the first time. We were really excited at the 80th anniversary Phantom issue 1763. And very simple cover in a sense, in the vein of it's just a phantom at the front and then the number on the thing. One of the things I distinctly remember about is being really excited about the embossing. I know some people, and I said before about being a little bit disappointed with how simple the cover was or whatever. Would it have helped if there'd been some embossing on there? Would that have fixed the problem, do you reckon? Or are you with this cover exactly as it stands?
Well, I'm happy with the cover. I think Glenn could have done a better cover, to be, truthfully honest. Like, I think he could have done something really, really nice. Or Glenn Lumsden. But I think the cover does its job. Like the big, the big 75th, the big 75, the heroic image of the Phantom. It does its job. Yeah, it could have been embossed, but I would rather a non-embossed cover and it being full color than it being embossed and half color and half black and white, which that other comic which you raised was.
What if you had to remove one Dean Rankin story, which were both quite short?
What, to get it embossed?
Get it embossed, but it's 4 pages shorter.
Look, with the limited knowledge I know about printing costs, it would have been, especially now because it's definitely gone up a lot more. It wouldn't have been 4 pages. It would have been, it might have been, say, I don't know.
A full.
Yeah, like maybe 150 pages, 140, 120. Yeah. And I just think 180 is a nice thick size. It's, it's not 100-page special. So, look, I didn't miss the embossing. Yeah, the embossing was nice. I remember when we did the review of that, Stephen spent about the whole time just, feeling the Phantom with his finger. But look, for me, there was, the embossing wasn't an issue for me.
the other thing, and we talk about the package, and we'll move to that question you were asking about the whole package of this comic. The other thing I found when I dug out 1763, the 80th anniversary, was it came with this card. I'd forgotten about that. It was in the plastic covering with a little bonus. Should the 75th have come with a bookmark or a card or something like that as a little bonus? Do you reckon?
Yeah. To be honest, yeah, it could have, but if you want to do that, you would have to, unless if it was a poster which is attached, which you probably can't do because this is actually got a spine and it doesn't have staples. It would have to be plastic shrink wrapped, which again costs extra money. You know, if you were to do that, would you then have to sacrifice the color? I think the color is a big thing here because not only does it make it appealing and it makes it a big deal, you know, it's 180 pages, full color and all that. It also makes it collectible for a lot of other fans from around the world as well.
Yep.
Especially the Indian market. We know that color is a huge draw card for the Indians. So look, I'm happy. Yeah, all those things could have been good. You know, maybe they could have, I think it was 1032 where they did the poster with a little serrated edge through issue 1032. So maybe you could have done that.
Family portrait.
We're nitpicking a little bit.
Oh, 100% agree. Just thought I'd throw it out there because I remembered about the embossing on that old comic and then found the card. I'm with you. I think this is a great package. And actually, out of interest, that was $20 back in the day for 212 pages, but only some of them red and white, and one story color and a little card. And at the end of the day, I'm with you. I'd rather have the whole story, the whole comic in full color, and gee, a bunch of really interesting stories. And we need to get into the concept of it. What did you think about the fact that there was no reprints? There's nothing from past Frews. We built on with sequels. The concept of only having brand new stories from, and all of the artists, all of the authors, all of the creators of this are Frew crew creators, people that have come on board into Frew Comics since Glenn Ford, Renee White took over with Dudley Hogarth as publisher, obviously.
Minus Tony Paul and Mike Manley.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Yep.
But
and we'll talk about that story. It is stand out because of that reason as much as anything.
But I guess the point is that majority of them are, like you said, homegrown in a sense. They might not be Australian, but they're from the Frew crew creative team. I guess you could call it Team Frew Crew. If you want to give it a cheesy name. But also the fact is that they're all alive. So they're all, it's like if you were doing, a Ray Moore story or a Cy Barry story or something kind of like that, these are all people that are alive, that are kicking, that are creating stories now. It shows that it kind of gives me, an impression of where Frew are going, is that this is probably where they are going, is they're wanting homegrown new stuff. It's got, the stories are giving a nod to the history. It's very important. Like the first story is the sequel to the first Frew story, which really cool which would have been done by purpose. Dudley would have included that for that reason. So, it gives a nod to the history, but then it's like, we're not a reprint comic. We are a new Phantom story comic. We've got new creators. We've got, you've got, Flavia, Jeremy, who are all youngish in the creative,
relatively speaking. Yeah, absolutely.
In the creative area. So
yeah. Cool. No, I agree, and I think we'll expand on our thoughts of the collection of stories as we work through the stories, and we are of course going to do that one at a time. We've already both mentioned the idea of color. I think just to reinforce how good is it that all all of the 180 pages are in color. Am I right there, Jen? Would this be the longest, certainly regular comic through, not a trade paperback or anything like that? Would this be the longest one that's all in color?
Yeah. The previous would be the Christmas albums, which were about, I think one of them was about 108 or something like that, or 116 or something. So that would be, obviously I'm in a different financial situation as I was when I was 12, 13, 14, when basically working at Hungry Jack's to fund my addiction. But me, in my situation where I am now, I would much rather spend $25 on an annual like this once a year, on something like this, than than a annual with reprint stories and stuff like that. But
you'd like to see this be so you're saying this be a template? A template kind of for the annual that's released each January, sort of thing.
Yeah. Now I think if you were to do an annual like that, and again, this isn't on the run sheet, we do need to move on pretty quickly, but I would like to see if they were to do something like that. Say, for instance, Shane Foley's story. If it's a sequel or a prequel, you would reprint the original story in color, remastered, redigitized, and all that type of stuff, as well as then the sequel. Now, I understand and I agree with the concept of not putting the Slavers story in this comic,
in this particular comic.
But if it was, say, an annual, you could put the original in and then the prequel or the sequel. And I also think it's good for a newer creator to be able to create stories like that, because you're giving them a stricter framework or sandbox to be able to create in as well, which then helps them to be able to learn and create in the Lee Falk universe a little bit better. I want to go over some of the feedback that we've actually received from what do you call it, from you, the fans. Now, when we posted this news, as well as we've also done a little quick 1-minute flick through on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we've received some feedback and some comments from fans. So we'll just quickly go over them. This podcast is for the fans as much as it is for us. So, so we've got Roy Viola, looks awesome. I can't wait. Ivan Pedersen looks very nice. My only, and then he raises an issue about the Frew paper, which we will get into.
To be fair, Ivan Pedersen coloured some of these stories, and so has a vested interest in what it's looking like printed on the paper that Frew do. And we'll talk about that as we work through the colour issues of the stories.
You got Sanjay, thanks Frew for this wonderful surprise. And then he talks about how hopefully, we can see, a continue of the rest of the year celebrating the celebration, maybe some other surprises. And then Thomas is just saying he just wants to get it. Simon Brown, sweet, that looks awesome. Can't wait for it to be released. Harmony Gates, full color, exclamation mark. The constant, then he talks about the constant appearance of Julie Walker in these non-Falk stories makes me wonder why she wouldn't have become part of the mythology. Phantom can become two people. Phantom can appear as a woman, i.e. as an old jungle saying.
What I would say to that is there is an old jungle saying, Phantom takes many forms, and that's the one that I've always thought would apply, whether the Phantom appears as Julie or as Devil, as he has sometimes, or whatever. So, yeah, let's. I reckon it's there if you want to access it.
In one of the stories that we reviewed recently, I think it was one of the 22nd Phantom stories, actually, by Claes Remufi and Janice Auden. When Kit and Heloise are fighting side by side, they actually talk about how the Phantom can merge from male to female and stuff. So, but anyway, Bradley Kelly talks about how he enjoys Ivan Rodriguez's art. Biswaji Roy talks again about the colour and the paper, which is a bit of a common theme here, which again we will talk about. You got David Griffin. Frew's 75th edition is a nice package, like the Ivan Rodriguez art, 2 sequel stories and the Vietnam story the best. Dean Draper, got mine, loved it. He talked about one of the stories that he wasn't completely sold on. And then he talked about what was his favourite story, which was the sequel to number 1. Ivan Pedersen has talked about that he is pretty sure that he will colour some more of Shane Foley's stories. So I think that's a bit exciting to hear as well. And then one person made mention that when we did the flick through on the video that it seemed like nice, thick paper. And then you've got Jenny Mooney, who was a little bit disappointed. She didn't like the concept of having part stories in the comic, where we kind of said that it's probably forces you to then buy the next issue so you can read the completed story. So there's that as well. Mycroft was amazed at 180 pages. Wonderful way to spend an afternoon. Joey Pajamas, which is Joe Douglas, said it looks awesome and that he hopes that Frew continue to deliver the best Phantom comics in years. Another question about the color, common thread, and then there's a couple of others as well. So look, make sure you always share your fan input and we will share it on our reviews as well. But anything you want to kind of add to that, or should we get into the stories?
Oh, look, I guess if you're talking about input that people have written in, do have a good read of the message from the publisher from Dudley Hogarth. He talks about the process of putting it together and how much he enjoys all of it, and a little shout out to people who want to get their mug featuring in one of these Frew comics. I don't know Bob Badger myself, but apparently he is in The Slavers, the Women, and the Bogey Man, which is the first comic we'll review. Jermayn, I gather he's from Perth, is what I've heard. So you probably bump into him at lunch, don't you?
Yeah, it's that small. There's only like 20 people in here. To be honest, I'm not even 100% sure which one is Bob. Or maybe he's one of the guards, or maybe he's even the guy who, if I had to guess, he's probably the guy who drugged the Phantom.
I was thinking the same thing. I thought he might have been the pilot. Look, let's talk about that story. I really like the way it's introduced in terms of the snapshot, and because of the change from landscape to portrait style, it fits really well to have that at the top of the screen there as Jerm's sharing. At the bottom, we get the original artwork from Wilson McCoy, along with the just a quick summary of the characters. So you don't actually have to go back and reread Frew number 1 or one of the replicas or reprints to catch up on the story. Those 5 panels talking about those 5 characters, I think, really brings you up to speed in a way that lets you access this story immediately. Did you have the same experience?
Completely agree. It was Ray Moore, not Wilson McCoy, but
sorry, yes.
But yeah. But yes, no, completely agree. It was a great recap, 1 page. You felt like, when I read that, I was like, oh, I don't need to read the story. I can get straight back into it.
Especially for those of us who did not come in late. We've read this story a number of times. You just immediately go back into that. I'd be interested to know if that was enough for someone who did, come back to the fandom recently or hasn't read The Slavers, obviously, in the past. I suspect it would still work as a standalone story with that introduction to the characters. So the story itself,
if I had to be picky with the intro, it would have been nice if they included the Frew comics of the slave traders. So then that way, if you are a newbie, you could at least dig out that issue or something like that. But look, hey, I'm nitpicking here, so
yeah, for sure. Just go to Fandom Wiki, mate. That's all there. So
well, yeah, that's true.
I really enjoyed this story. You've already said that you liked it. Do you want to tell us why?
One of the things that really grabbed my attention was how good the coloring worked up in this story. Now, in every issue, I'm going to be mentioning color. Now, the reason I'm mentioning color is because as we went through the social media, every second or third comment was asking about the color. So it's a big deal to a lot of fans out there. Color. So I think what works well in here is the colors that Ivan used. It worked well on this paper. So that was a great point.
the artwork that he was colouring lent itself, and I know you'll flick through this as we talk, but on these opening pages and as we go, there's a lot of open spaces in Shane Foley's art for colour to spread out, if you like, and it doesn't need to jump on top of each other. And I'm sure, as you alluded to, we'll talk about this in other stories, but this Shane Foley's art is really open and clean and gives colour the opportunity to work.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to go as far as to say that this may be easily the top 3, top 5 best prequel, sequel, team Frew Crew stories that have been created by them.
What makes you say that?
I just think, one, it works as a standalone story.
Yes.
It actually adds something to the story.
Yes.
It doesn't try and, like, I liked how the fact that the sand hermit doesn't get the girl at the end. Maybe it's because I've watched too many romantic movies with my wife, but it doesn't try to tie up the story. I feel like sometimes with these prequels and sequel stories that the Frew Crew have created is that they almost try and tie up the loose ends, where this doesn't actually tie up the loose end. And I just like that.
Yep. And we should say we should have said right from the beginning, spoilers left, right, and center. If we're going to talk about the full story, if you want to explore the stories for yourself, read it first and then come back to the podcast, because we do want to be able to talk about the way that the stories are structured and stuff. And I agree with you. The fact that, it ties up a lot of loose ends. It leaves the sand hermit in the same situation, really, that we had him at the end of the slave traders. And so that works perfectly for that character. Sews up other loose threads and tells us so much more about him, which I love, but leaves him in the same place.
Yeah. Look, this fight scene here on
is that page 25?
Yeah.
I noted too.
Yeah, so that's great. I like the whole full circle of the whole ant, being stuffed in the anthill with Ali and all that. And then the other thing, like I said about how it ties the story, is I liked how Ali is Egyptian, and then that's how the Phantom ends up in Alexandria, which is the place of the next Phantom adventure that was printed in the newspapers back when when the original story was originally printed in newspapers. So, it got the Phantom from the desert to Egypt. And he had he had a little bit of fun in between it, and so I like that as well.
Agreed, because in that sense, it's not just a sequel to the Slave Traders; it's also the prequel to Mysterious Girl. So, he's done really, really well, Shane. He's cleverly looked at where the Phantom starts and finishes for this little narrative.
Yeah, and like you were talking about the empty spaces, like look at these 3 panels here, where it really shows the empty panels. Now, obviously, you're in a desert, which is a lot easier to draw empty panels than, say, the jungle. But it does do it really, really good there.
And I don't want anyone to hear that and think of it as in Shane Foley has not done any drawing. He absolutely has. He just leaves a lot of space in each panel, which in black and white, it works as well. But I just think the way, because if this story was just black and white, it might look a little empty in places. I just think the color, he's just left room for the color to work. I think that's what I said earlier, and just is so well done by the colorist to use that in a way that adds so much.
Completely agree.
The Sand Hermit's past wife. I know you enjoyed the way that was left. Did you enjoy getting to that and bringing the Sand Hermit back into Phantom mythology? Because he's a really interesting character. Shane's explored him really well, and just was left on tenterhooks for 85 or 75 years at least since we first saw him in a Frew story.
Really liked it. Very happy with the story. Can't complain. It's, like I said, Paul, I think it's one of the better Falk prequels sequels from the Team Frew crew.
100%. All right, let's move on then to the second story, which is, I guess, well, it's just come straight into a much more modern-looking comic, which was an interesting snap break from, something that Shane Foley did, and he did replicate Ray Moore's art pretty well. It was certainly in that same vein, and then suddenly we're in a very modern story, the one called The Sing Pirates, written by Andreas Eriksson, with art by Ivan Rodriguez, who's a very dynamic artist. Started with Frew as a cover artist, and now is getting increasing numbers of stories of internal art. The splash page that you've got on the screen there, Jerm, was just so vibrant when you turn the page and see that there. And suddenly you're into pages that have colour right to the edge of the page. And there's the term bleeding or something that I'm not entirely across. Just a very different style of story. Turn the page from 33 to 34, and it's a world of difference.
Probably going to offend a lot of people that I actually class as friends who are Phantom creators, but my 3 favorite interior Phantom current artists are Ivan Rodriguez, Janice Auden, and Daniel Picciotto. And I really, really rate Ivan's work, and this is good. Some of the artwork in this is amazing. If you're listening to this in audio and you haven't got this comic yet, jump onto YouTube and have a bit of a squiz at what we're looking at, because you will see it.
Because 49, I think, is a sensational. I don't know that I agree with you that Ivan would be one of my top 3, but I do really enjoy him as an artist. Back one. This montage of Kit and Julie fighting together. That's it. On the right-hand side of your screen, if you're watching on YouTube, what have we got there? 15 phantoms fighting against pirates and stuff, all in one montage page. Not a straight line to be seen, not a panel, but you can follow the fight around the page, and it's just such a dynamic. That would be, how good would that be to own the original of that page to have up on your wall?
I'm not sure if he actually does original traditional pen, but yeah, you're right. If he did, that would be the page. Would be the page, because
that's what.
Even the one afterward as well.
With the dive from the high.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's worth making mention that this dive sequence was actually in a Kit and Heloise story. I think it was called
on page 51.
Yeah, where Kit goes home, or goodbye to the deep woods, or something like that. If you're on YouTube, we'll include the panel sequence of this. But it's a nice touch of what Andreas included, something from the Daily Story, of a mention of, this is what they did. So it's not beyond the, it's believable to be able to think that back 100 years, the same kids of the Phantom, who are also twins, did the same thing. And that was, jump off that ledge.
It's the sort of thing, those 2 panels at the top of page 51 there, they could appear on the, Comic Swipes Facebook page or whatever, but not in any sort of negative way. It's absolutely done by Ivan as a homage to, at the author's instruction, at Andreas' instruction, to pay homage to the original story, as you said. And bring the Phantom worlds together and explain how they're this good. For mine, the male Phantom's probably a little bit thick set, and the female Phantoms are probably a little bit over endowed in the chest area as well, to be honest, if I'm going to be super critical of the art. But again, if we're talking about a story in the package of the 75th anniversary comic, I think it really stands up. It's a classic Sing Pirates. It's got your female bad guy as the female bad guy, the bad girl is someone who's you've got to feel some sympathy for as well, because she was forced to become a Sing pirate, then just found she was really good at it. Became an unknown commander. I really like the crack about the unknown commander.
That was clever.
Page 55. she's an unknown commander of her League of the Singing Pirates, and the
page
comment,
42. The guy goes, I still think it's a dumb idea to have an unknown commander.
yes, yeah, there it is. And then on page 55, it's what do you think about this unknown commander? Any connection to our own one? From another.
Yeah.
And I love the reply. For all I know, Colonel, the young lady who wrote off could have been our unknown commander, and she kind of is because she's a phantom. So it's really clever writing from Andreas, and we've said this before about him and his writing is so clear that he knows the phantom inside and out. So love those little things that pop out. They're the sort of things that give you a little giggle.
We talked about color. So my personal opinion with the color in this is that some pages don't work when it comes to color. And they would be on page 34, the top two panels. Now on the scan, which you will see on YouTube, it actually works. But
it's a lot clearer in the scan than it is on the page.
Yeah, it doesn't work as good. And this is probably on a whole is majority of the color works really, really well, but there's just the odd page or the odd panel where the coloring is a little bit dark. There's a little bit too many blues, and it kind of gets a little bit muddy. But that's where, say, someone like what Ivan did, which is very
I think this
simpler style.
Yeah, and that's the point. This coloring is right for this artwork, for this story.
Yes.
It's on these pages, the paper stock lets it down.
Yes.
Would you have been prepared to pay $30 for the book instead of $25 to get the better quality paper? That's probably what we're talking.
Yes.
That is another considerable jump, and price
it is.
25 is expensive already.
I know some people are going to look at like the 4 or 5 pages where the color doesn't work and they're going to blast the whole comic. I think that's unfair and I think that's unjustified, and I think you are being overtly negative for the sake of being negative. It's only a couple of pages where it doesn't work. Majority of the coloring does work. There's a story later on which I will talk about. Now, there's another thing that I'm a little bit unsure about when it comes to points with the coloring, and that is this lady, the female pirate, as being a redhead, and also Julie being a redhead. Julie's actually blonde, so that's a mistake. But then I was reading the story, and maybe I'm just reading too much into this, but it talks about how she was, a raider came to my village, and, we're in Africa, right? We're not in Europe. We're in Africa. How many light-skinned, red-headed women are in villages in Africa in the 1800s? What she was saying and the way she was coloured didn't really gel with me. So I'm not sure whether I picked it up and then maybe Julie didn't pick it up quick enough that, hang on, this doesn't make sense, or maybe the colouring was a little bit wrong in that instance.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, look, and I didn't notice that Julie was a redhead herself until, well, I think the last 2 pages is the only time she's got her hair outside the cowl. And look, while I talk about those last 2 pages, I actually really enjoyed seeing a resolution. We have a lot of fandom comics these days, and it's to do with shorter pages that finish on the climax, so you get one panel to sort of summarize after the story. We got 2 full pages of, oh, we're home and let's reflect and then have a big family moment. And that's, I know people can be critical of that in Lee Falk stories in particular, but that's one of the things I really enjoyed about Lee Falk stories, I think, is that the first, as they came out in a comic book, the first couple of pages were the Phantom at home reading Chronicles, whatever, you get that picture of family life, and then the last page or 2 again was that resolution out of the story. And with the shorter page lengths in a lot of stories now, we don't get those moments. And I really liked that Andreas had written that into this particular story.
Completely agree. I love the full pages from Ivan as well. Making mention of these pages, which we're talking about 56 and 57, is this looks like it's the first time that this Phantom actually talked about the Pirate Queen. Now,
Yeah.
the Pirate Queen gets mentioned a fair bit on this podcast. I think we're all kind of fans of her, all that story arc. In the story arc of the Pirate Queen, at the death of this phantom, Julie says, "Oh, I know about you," to the Pirate Queen, and she's like, "Oh, you know about me," and so maybe this is the example of, hey, look, we've all changed, put on the mask. Here's an example, and so brothers and sisters, especially twins, are generally are a little bit closer. So I like that little touch as well by Andreas.
I think that speaks to how well he knows the character, not just the Fork stories, but also, well, all of the rest of them, and tying them all together. It's cleverly done, which makes me wonder, can you flick back to page 52 for me? Because this is something that he's clicked into that we've talked about before. And that is when Julie says, "No, I'm going to go and take care of the big bad, if you like." And she passes over the ring. She takes the skull ring off Kit, puts it on her own finger. There we are on the bottom left of the screen you got up on YouTube. She takes the skull ring off Kit, puts it on her own finger because I'm about to go and skull mark somebody. Interesting that they're sharing the ring rather than have one each, which we've speculated about that before.
Yeah, well, maybe Andreas should have listened to us before, and then
Listen, I like what he's done. I think really the fact that there's a double skull ring going out there.
Look, I did actually like that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe our Kit and Heloise are a little bit smarter than Kit and Julie. They remembered reading the story about the four fans who were creating a replica skull ring, and then that's why they're using that.
Look, it does raise the question, is this a bit of a template for 20-second Phantom stories? Because I really like the way in this whole story, Kit and Julie work together. It starts with Julie being the Phantom in a city because Kit's elsewhere. It's a bit coincidental and they find each other really easily in the big city once Kit arrives, sort of thing. But they've both had their parts to the adventure. Then they come together, they work together. They split apart again to take care of their own parts of the adventure, and then the whole thing, it ends with two Phantoms working together. Harmony in the social media has talked about, should there be odd jungle sayings about this sort of behaviour? I reckon this is how the 20-second Phantom could be told. With these constant back and forth sharing crossover stories.
All right, well, listeners, we are on social media. We're on YouTube. Give us your thoughts about that idea from Dan. We'll leave that question there, and we'll leave that in the ether, and we will look forward to listening what the fans think about that.
To be fair, I think that question has been posed by Andreas, not by me. So I'm just picking up on what he's putting down. It does bring us, though, to the next story, which is Ghosts of Ships Past. I'm holding up the splash page there, but it actually starts with a little prequel or prologue, if you like, before that. This is a fascinating story for mine, written by Andrew Constant, drawn, coloured and lettered by Jason Palos. The man's a machine, we know that. What did you think of Ghosts of Ships Past, Jermayn?
Can I use a joke that we've already used today, and that is that it's Cleaver.
Very Cleaver story.
in this story, it seems like Jason Paulos had a lot of fun drawing this story. It seems like Andrew Constant, sorry, I was about to call him Andreas. Andrew Constant had a lot of fun as well. Obviously, the big reveal, again, we are going to spoil this for people who haven't listened to it, is that there is a return of a bad guy. Now, I did not personally rate this bad person in the original story that she appeared in, but I liked her after I've read this first part.
Yeah. And look, we must give credit where credit's due. Stephen actually speculated probably 3 or 4 weeks ago in our chat online that Captain Cleaver was at some point going to make a reappearance. So I don't know if he had some inside word, but
I think he had inside word, but we'll give him a little bit of credit.
Yeah. Now, for those who came in late or just for whatever reason did not read the Kid Phantom series, Captain Cleaver. And this is what I was saying about how interesting it is. It really brings Kid Phantom into the rest of the Phantom universe, doesn't it? Because
Yes.
we've got this, 75th anniversary. It's going to be a very widely read book, and a character from the Kid Phantom comic books comes back. Captain Cleaver comes back as Commander Cleaver into this story. I think both of them written by Andrew Constant, if I remember rightly. Did Andrew write
Yes.
Kid Phantom?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's clearly a character that he likes, and why not? Because I'll be interested to hear what you say, because you said that you didn't really like her in the Kid Phantom book, but now what you do in the Ghosts of Ships Past, the way she's come back.
I don't really know how to explain it, but she didn't capture me as a character that I would have liked to seen more from in the original Kid Phantom story. But in this one, now that she's got a son and, she's trying to build the empire, you've got the legacy bad people. I don't know. To me, there just seems to be more about her that I like. It probably doesn't make sense, but I personally like her better.
Well, I think by virtue of the genre, like Kid Phantom was deliberately aimed at younger readers, so the characters are shallower. There's a bit more depth to her now. I really like the black and white page sequences. We talk about this whole book being in colour, but the two you're just flicking over there, page 75 and 76, are the black and white pages, if you like, grayscale. And they are Jason Paulos's take on Paul Mason's version of the artwork, the dream sequence, or the flashback sequence, if you like, of when Kid Phantom, defeated Captain Cleaver in the first instance. And I just really enjoyed seeing his take on it, and I haven't gone back to Kid Phantom. I probably should, the issue 3, to have a look at the sequence there, but I just really enjoyed that going back to it and bringing that character into this new realm of the Phantom.
Now one of the reasons why I'm kind of hovering around this area here is we talked about in the last story the night scene with the blues, and it was a bit muddy and a bit hard to read. This area here where the Phantom is going below deck, so we're talking about, page 71, 72, 73, and then the grayscale, which is 75, 76. I actually feel like the colour, and I'm assuming, and I would like to give credit to Jason, that he's worked a lot more on this paper stock than probably what Daniel Jr. has. So he almost knows how to colour for this paper stock. And I also believe that probably Ivan has learnt a lot as well when he's done his previous colouring on how to do a colour on this paper stock. And so I think their colours, while might not be as dynamic as, say, someone like a Daniel Jr., I think has worked well because it works on this paper stock.
Yep. No, that makes complete sense, because particularly as you flick through, they're quite deliberate in the broad colours they use. There's not the finer grained colours, which would work better on the higher quality paper, the heavier paper, the more expensive paper at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now we'll quickly talk about the cliffhanger. Obviously, now me personally, I do not know anything. I'm going to declare that. I reckon one of the reasons why the Phantom is not freaking out and all that is because this one here on page where he's looking down at the sharks, which is page 79, I reckon there's a dolphin in there, and that's why he's not freaking out, because he knows that there's Solomon or Nefertiti or something like that is there, and that's how he's going to be rescued. Now,
well, just the commentary there, it looks like you're about to make some new friends. I can see that this area is famous for them. I think they're famous to him. Commander Cleaver may not know which friends she's talking about, but he certainly does. Yeah,
so that's how I think he's going to get out of it. Now, I'm asking you this question because this was a question raised by one of our social media commenters. I think it was Jenny Mooney. Do you like the idea that this comic has part stories, so i.e. part 1 of this story, is in this comic, and then we're going to get a part 2 in a future comic. Do you like that idea, or would have you rather seen the whole story?
I have no problem with it because, of course, I am a loyal subscriber and a dedicated reader. I do a podcast talking about Phantom comics. So I'm going to get the next one. I'm going to see part 2 of the story. So it's no problem for me at all. There are going to be people who pick this up for the first time. The first time they picked up a fan. When I left the newsagent, I told that story earlier. Not going to lie, it was a Friday night. No, it wasn't. It was a Thursday night. I still went next door to the bottle shop, and when I grabbed a 6-pack of beer, I put my Phantom comic down on the at the counter of the bottle shop to pay for it, to get my wallet out, whatever. And I had the back cover down. We didn't talk about the back cover, but I had the back cover facing up, and the attendant has looked at that and gone, "Is that a Phantom comic? Do they still make those?" And I turned it over and, it's the 75th. My point being, if you were going to go, oh, geez, I better go into the shop and then get one of these special editions, are you going to want to read a part 1 and think, oh, now I'm compelled to buy a part 2? Who knows? But if you like one or both of the stories enough to go, I reckon I will get the next episode because I want to see how this ends, you may drag a few extra readers in. I think it's a clever marketing tactic. I have no problem with it. If you're just a casual reader and are not going to pick up the next comic anyway, then, well, it's a serial. You don't read the Monday after the Saturday. You start to fall behind on the daily. That's what Phantom comics are like. So I think it's fine. If Jenny is upset, go and buy the next issue so you can catch up on the rest of the story and get a subscription.
Now, did you tell that story just because, like, you were hoping that seeing you had a comic that might ask you for ID?
It's been decades since that happened. No, I realised that was a really long-winded answer to a very simple question. Sorry, Jim. That's not going to help us finish it in an hour. Come on, let's get snappy. Let's move on. Undergrowth. Undergrowth is the next story, written by Dean Rankin, artist back to Ivan Rodriguez, who you've loved, with another colorist, a different one, Torella Pablo, which I'm going to be upfront, I've never heard of. Sweet little 4-page Dean Rankin story. That's pretty much the stories that he delivers. What did you think of this?
I really liked it. I've said before, new creators should be given these 4, 6, 8, 10-page stories as their testing ground. Dean Rankin has produced, 3 of these now? I now go, okay, he knows enough about the Phantom that I will trust him with a 22-page story. And I know that there are Australian creators and other creators who want to create comics. I've said it before and I'll say it again. These are perfect examples that if you want to create Phantom stories for Team Frew crew, these are the type of stories you need to create. Create some little short, snappy 2, 4, 6, 8-page stories that show you, get and understand the Phantom. It means you can work within a time restraint, within a budget, within pages. And then when you can do a good story and when you've got a couple behind you, then us fans can trust you with a full-page story.
Interesting. Then I would say to you, this is a 4-page story. Of the 4 pages, there's 20 panels. The Phantom appears on 2 of the pages and in only 4 of the panels. The 2 that you've got open for us do not have the Phantom. There's no reference to the Phantom really telling us about the bad guys. It's telling us about the jungle. I really like the misdirection in this story where you think that the bad guys are, they're there lying in waiting. The Phantom's in trouble. The Phantom never even knows he's in trouble. The Phantom, The story of the Phantom in this, he's going for a ride through the jungle. That's it. All this stuff's happening around him. So it's an interesting point you make that Dean Rankin knows the Phantom. All he's got is the Phantom going for a ride in the jungle.
To write a good Phantom story, it doesn't always have to just be about the Phantom. One of my all-time favourite Phantom stories is called the Psychopath. It's created by Leonard Moberg and Krista Thunberg, I think it was, late 1990s, 2000s, where it's talking about a guy who was beaten up by a jungle demon, and it's talking about from his point of view, and he's in a psych ward.
Mm-hmm.
The Phantom's in the Phantom's obviously the jungle demon, but he's in maybe 5 pages of it, and you never actually see the Phantom. You see a silhouette, you see the white little triangles for his eyes and stuff like that, but you're seeing it from the bad guy's perspective, and it's one of my all-time favorite stories. Almost like a sugar hit between some stories, or ad break between the heavier stories. Like we've gone from, the Ghost Pirates, and then once we're finished with this story, we're going to the Kiss of the Devil and all that. It's almost like, like the trailer before the main event or something like that.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. It was a nice little story. And I don't want anything that I said before to in any way be interpreted as a criticism of Dean Rankin, because I think I really, really, really like this story. The introduction for generations, the Bengala jungle has been under the protection of the Phantom. You come back to that in the conclusion, but you add, and sometimes the jungle protects him back. And it's really cleverly, the narrator, bubbles, whatever, are written really cleverly, take us through the story. The art supports that so well with the animals and the branch and the quicksand and all that sort of stuff. It's so well done. This might be my favorite story in the book, if I'm honest. So what did you think of page 82? Before we leave it, because we're not going to be on this forever, it's a 4-page story. Page 82, as the bad guy disposes of the frog and poisons himself. The action, or the onomatopoeia, is flick. Did you read that differently? Because I certainly did. The first time I opened that, I'm up like, Dudley, what have you let through?
Oh, I'd love to hear Dudley's response to that one. Dudley, we're expecting a comment or an email once you listen to this.
I certainly read that very differently. Did you think that when you first read it, or am I?
No.
A school teacher who's seen too much graffiti, perhaps.
Too much graffiti in the toilets. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's move on then to the Kiss of the Devil, because as much as I like the Dean Rankin story, I'm going to go back on it. This might be my favorite story in the book, The Kiss of the Devil. Peter Anderson is the author here. Giancarlo Caracuzzo, he's becoming an increasing favourite of Frew's. Was heavily criticised looking back on it for the trade paperback he did. The Sword of the Caliph was the first time we saw his work with Frew, and a lot of people didn't like his artwork. But I don't know about you, Jerm, but I'm really starting to warm to his artwork, and I think it was really well done in this particular story, which again was really well supported by the writing, really well directed by the writing of Peter Anderson. What are your thoughts before I go into too much?
Look, Giancarlo knows how to tell a story. He does it in a European way. It really reminds me, I've read a lot of Asterix, Tintin, Lucky Luke, and some other European style comics, and it has that storytelling which I think works well with Peter's work. I like his directions, how Giancarlo tells the story. I like the style. Obviously, he's got his daughter to color his work, so you would think and you would hope that they would be able to work well together as well. I wonder if this story might have worked better as a graphic novel.
And have the 2 parts, because this is part 1 of 2. Again, we mentioned that. 2 parts come together, do you reckon?
Yeah,
just because you've already seen Giancarlo's work as a trade paperback or a graphic novel?
I like Frew producing trade paperbacks, graphic novels. I've said in the past that I would like to see Frew doing a graphic novel once or twice a year, or a trade paperback once a year. Maybe do one of each. Releasing one towards Christmas, one towards Supernova time, and creating for those events. And I think this story could have worked. Now I've only read part 1, obviously, but I think it could have worked quite well as a graphic novel.
Yeah. Interesting. Like, just while you're holding open on that page, 94, 95 is the page you've got open for those who aren't watching us on YouTube. We've talked about the color a lot. I actually really like the way that Flavia has colored this. Page 94 is a standalone page. Page 95 is a standalone page, but we've got the sunset that is happening at the time shown across the bottom of a bottom third of the page, across 94 and 95 together, with the sun on the far left-hand panel, working the whole way across the double spread page. It's actually a really clever way of colouring, I think, to because the story doesn't travel that way around the page, but the light does. And I just think that's really cool.
I really like her work. And again, her colouring, which we've discussed before, actually works really well in this story. Now, a couple of quick points. There's a couple of moments.
And his paper quality, we've sort of talked around that before, but it's one of those ones where she does understand the paper quality it's coming out on.
We've talked before, like sometimes we like Pitter's humour, sometimes we think it's a little bit out of place. I think the humorous moments in here actually work quite well.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like now, I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but the boys talk about this really ugly bad guy, right? That's the bit of the joke going on and on. Now, if you are looking at the top of page, what is it? Is it 101? No, 10...
100 and 101.
Yeah, 101, the top right corner, the lady actually calls the bad guy McCoy. Now, for those who are phantom nuffies like you and I, McCoy is very well known for drawing really ugly bad guys. And now I'm not sure if I'm just reading too much into this or whether this is a little joke that Pitter and Glenn or the editors or whatever are doing. But having a really ugly bad guy who's been referenced as a really ugly bad guy named McCoy made me all nice, warm and fuzzy. So if that was a little bit of an inside joke, Peter, I got it and I liked it.
Very good. Yeah, my thoughts as I was going through this story, actually, what I was drawn to was the fact that we've got another femme fatale, and a really effectively written femme fatale. So this is the fifth story. As we've said, the fourth story, Dean Rankin didn't really have the Phantom in it much at all, so no femme fatale there. Ghost of Ships Past, Kemal de Cleaver, female, the big bad, if you like. In the Sing Raiders, the big bad was a female as well. But I think the Kiss of the Devil is the one that we would call a genuine femme fatale, in that we've got a female character who uses her feminine wiles and her sexiness in many ways to get the better of the people around her. The earlier characters, the earlier female characters, were just strong women, whereas this one is a strong woman, but she uses her femininity and her sexiness as part of that. The others did not so much. Is that something you picked up on, that we were suddenly getting a lot of female characters?
Probably not as much, but I did like the fact that she was actually the person that rescued McCoy and saved the day with McCoy. So like she bettered the Phantom, not the henchman, got twice.
Get his second skull mark, yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I was reading this, I got a lot of Phantom movie references.
Billy Zane, you saw Billy Zane in the back.
I saw a lot of, almost getting hit by the taxi driver.
It's missing the fact that he jumped out of the zoo.
Yeah, but so it's missing that. And then you've got the female villain, Sala.
Yep.
This person. And then you've got what would likely happen when you try and jump onto the pontoon part of the seaplane, is that you would actually fall off. Unlike who was able to hang on to it for several hours.
My man Billy Zane would just hang on to the bottom of that plane. I don't know what this Phantom is. No, you're 100% right. There are strong Billy Zane Phantom movie vibes in this, and it would be fascinating to know if Peter Anderson, and he'll probably tell us once he listens to this or watches it on his big screen, I think we've seen, to know if and how much the Phantom movie was in his thinking as he was putting this one together, or maybe it's he's directed the traffic, and then Giancarlo's drawn it. But no, I 100% agree with you. There was a lot of Billy Zane Phantom movie vibes in this.
Yeah, no, and I don't know, maybe he's trying to say this is how the story should have been or something. But look, it was, I enjoyed those references.
Agreed.
I'm looking forward to where part 2 is going, because we've haven't really actually started the story in a sense. Like, yeah, we now know that, the Phantom knows who it is, but we haven't learned anything about the submarine. We've still got the submarine. What happens to these kidnapped people, and, what's the reason for it and all that. So, this is part 1. Are we going to get, say, part 2, part 3, part 4, or is it just going to be a 2-parter story? We're still really it feels like to me, we're still at the start of the story.
It's a good point. I had just assumed probably it would be a part 2. I have no doubt that the action could move quick enough to resolve all of the loose ends. But you're right, when you go through them like that, there is still a lot of loose ends in this. So I had probably just figured that it would be a part 2, and we'd be through it. But you could be onto something there.
All right. Anything else, or should we move on to the next one?
No, let's move on, because speaking of stories that have got part 1, 2, 3, whatever, we're up to Vietnam number 8 in our next story, which was the Phantom in Nam number 8. The story called "And Our Friends Are All Aboard." I really enjoy singing along to Paul Mason's story titles, and again, Phantom in Nam is a Paul Mason creation. Does the writing and the artwork, and in this instance the colours as well. A great splash page, which we've seen, and then this might be one of the ones where the colours are maybe a bit dark at times for the paper stock. Again, it's more vibrant in the YouTube video. So
I actually thought that the colours actually work better in this one than in previous issues.
Yeah, okay.
I must ask Paul if he's actually changed the way he's coloured, but it feels like, and maybe it's these yellow boxes on page 119 that kind of makes it pop in the fact that the guy looks like he's wearing a white shirt, but it feels like the colours just work better, and I'm not sure whether it's the paper stock or just my imagination or what.
Yeah, you're probably right. I guess on the page, so it's 119. It feels like in the comic book I'm holding in my hand, not what we're seeing on the screen, that a lot of the detail in the trees and the building is lost in the purple. You can see it pretty clearly on the page there, but on the screen, but not so much on the page. But then as I flick through the rest of the story, you're right. It's not as bad as as what I've sort of suggested there. I will say though, Paul, I had to go and get my glasses to read this one, because the narration box are a bit smaller than the rest of the book, and I picked this one up at about 10 o'clock at night as I was going to bed to read myself to sleep, and I was up to the Vietnam story, and I was too tired, and I didn't have my glasses on me, and I was really struggling. So luckily, the art tells the story as much as anything. I struggled with the last page, the classic files on the page. Wasn't able to read all those on page 129 and get all the in jokes and that sort of stuff there, but the rest of it I could keep up with.
Yeah, on here, page 127, you got the bottom left panel, I guess, on page 127. It really reminds me, there's a panel in a Don Newton story where he has that. It's quite popular. Again, if you're on YouTube, I'll include that so people know what I'm talking about. But that panel reminds me of that Don Newton panel. Now, I'm not sure, but this Barry character looks a bit like David Barry, Si's son. I'm not sure if it is, but there's just a little bit of resemblance there. So I enjoy this story as a real standalone story. I felt like, and I think this was one of our criticisms, if you call it a criticism, but sometimes you almost had to know what was going on in the other stories, in the past stories, to kind of understand what's happening in here. But I didn't have that feeling. I felt like even if I never read a Vietnam story before, I could easily follow this.
That's a very fair call. What I liked about this story is we've had a few Nam stories that didn't continue the search for the Wambezi prince. And I like that this story has taken us a step closer to finding the Wambezi prince. I'm not in any hurry at all for the Nam stories to finish. I'm really enjoying them. But you do still like to be taking steps in the overall narrative arc, while you still have your fun stories about the Marshall sisters being entertainers that had nothing to do with the bigger picture. Those are still cool. They're still good. But I do like, the fact that we are still progressing in the overall narrative.
Yep. Very good point. I'm a bloke, and who doesn't like a good car chase?
Yep.
If it was an action movie, it had to have a car chase, whether it was, and look, there's been a million Fast and Furiouses. They've made a whole film thing on car chases. So it's worked for Fast and Furious. It can work for a Phantom story.
Absolutely. Righto. The next story is, we've mentioned this one already. I'll be interested in your take on this. Is To Rack and Ruin at Gravelines, and it's a daily story, which, and I should know this, and it's probably in the show notes, which I'm not looking at the moment, in terms of which daily story it was. And
258.
258. And it ran, without knowing the exact dates, it must have been about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, that To Rack and Ruin at Gravelines ran in the dailies.
2021 in May it started.
May of 2021 it started. So that is 2 years ago. And one of the things that jumped out to me straight away, it's because I'm still following the daily. Obviously, this is still part of this. I just talked about a story arc with Nam. This is still very much a part of the overall Phantom story arc in the dailies. And a lot of what's happening in the dailies right now, this month, has got references back to this story in 2021, and in fact, exact mirror images. It's an interesting time to be reading this as a full story. We've talked about this story before in our Comics and News podcasts as it unfolded in the newspapers or on Comics Kingdom. This is our first chance to read it as a complete story. There were certainly panels and days and even a week at a time that I would appear to have missed back in 2021. So really good to catch up on all of those and put the whole story together now. So those are that's my initial impressions. Jerm, what's your initial impression having read this one again now?
My first question is probably more, does this belong in this issue? Or is it a case of trying to catch up so you're not 2 years behind publishing the daily and Sunday stories? So
it's a really valid.
Maybe we won't actually answer these questions. We'll get our fans and listeners to answer it for us. But should we also be publishing it part at a time, or should we do what Jim Shepard did with the Death of Diana Palmer series, where he collected all the stories and published them together as one?
Yeah, I guess the challenge with that, and I tend to agree that it would be good to have this entire story arc in a single issue, and maybe that's a trade paperback down the track. Certainly, we know Hermes Press will do something along those lines when they eventually catch up to these dates. Where do you start and stop though? Like, so many of these panels go back to the story published from 2010. See the published story from 2015. Tony DePaul interweaves his stories and continues has his continuity stretch for so far. It's hard to know when to start and stop.
Where I guess the Death of Diana Palmer story had a more clear-cut start and end.
Yeah, I do tend to agree. I think with not a great deal of work, probably, you could find a way to put whatever this story arc, and when it's not finished yet, as I just referred to, it's current right now, as in it's continuing tomorrow, and it's in a really exciting point. It would be good, I think, to see those collected. I guess putting it into the 75th anniversary, I kind of like the part ones we saw before. Are people going to read this and go, I recognise this as a newspaper or that daily strip? I'm going to pick up on that, or I'm going to read the next Phantom comic that has this. I don't know. It just seems a little hidden in a sense that it's tucked towards the back even of this issue. Like you said earlier, it's not one of the Frew crew. artists per se. So it is the odd man out, if you like, in this book, which raises the question of does it work here? I really enjoyed reading it. If that is anything.
When I read it, it gave me a more fuller understanding of where we are currently, because I've read this part in a comic book, and that's why I feel that this will work better, and I think fans will appreciate it better if it does get collected.
So it could have been collected as a whole story, but then how long do you wait for it to finish? As I say, good to read it again. And fill in some blanks, and the timing is pretty cool. Mike Manley's art, we've talked about the colour. I think the colour that they use in the dailies works well enough on this paper stock. So the colour's really good. It would have been an easier one for Frew to add into the mix. The query I have around this is, like, as you raised right from the start, does it fit in this particular book?
Let's just say Frew gave me the keys. The way I would do it is I would print it in the regular comic, the way they are doing, then maybe having a page of recapping and stuff like that, like they did with the Slaver story at the start of this comic. And then when it's all finished, then publish it as a trade paperback.
Yeah, and pick a good start and finish point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I did, one of the things that's jumped out to me, and I know you've got opinions on this, Moz as a soothsayer rather than just a keeper of stories. Where do you stand on him doing that?
Well, it's law now. Tony DePaul has written about it enough that it's established as law. Do I like it? No. Do I prefer Old Man Moz as just a storyteller? Yes, but does Moz as a seer make him a better character?
Yeah.
You would have to say yes, it does. He's a better character under Tony DePaul than what he is under Lee Falk.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think he's developed, and because then we go, the next story in this is the Chronicles of Old Man Moz, which is, as I recall, from 18 months ago, whenever that story was in the dailies, very much about Moz writing down what he saw and then using what he wrote as misdirection, and you don't know if he's actually saying what he's seeing or is he saying what he wants you to think he's seen, and there's a fair bit going on. So it'll be interesting to carry on with that one.
Now, before we quickly move on, and I just said we need to move on, but I want to stop for a sec, is that we have started to have preliminary discussions with Tony DePaul, and we've told him that we do want him to get on to talk about this saga. We're not sure exactly when, but it is something we are working on and we do want to explore. So
and Tony's been really generous with his time in the past. So when the Phantom and the Nomad, or Heloise and the Nomad, that whole saga came to a conclusion, he's been really generous with his time in the past and I think he really enjoys it. The opportunity to go back over stories that he wrote over a long period of time, over a long time ago, and fill us in on some of the things that we might have missed. And and the way that he constructed the story, and I'm really looking forward to that, if and when it comes. So hopefully it does. Great. It's a great treat for us, and hopefully it's a treat for the listeners.
Definitely. All right, move on to the last story, Dan.
Yes. So this is The Box. The Phantom stars in the story The Box. It's written by Dean Rankin, which is an interesting thing to say because obviously writers do the writing. This is an 8-page story, so you'll be happy to hear that Dean Rankin's starting to get a bit more page time. There's 2 dialogues. There's a grand total of 5, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's a grand total of 12 words in this entire story.
There's more FX characters than there is words, bam, bam, chalk, whack. There's more of those than there is. I like it.
And it's not something we see a lot of, is it? Where we just have a story that is told by the art.
I must admit, when I first got it, I thought, "Oh no, they've stuffed up. I forgot to put
The dialogue.
the dialogue in the comic." And then I'm reading it, and I'm going, "Actually, no, I think they've done this on purpose. Good." Yeah, no, look, I like this story. Again, as we talked about the undergrowth one, it's the short, snappy, not like this podcast. This podcast is not short or snappy, but it's the short, snappy little page fillers that are not wasting space or anything. They add something. I got a lot of little warm, fuzzy moments during this comic. I enjoyed seeing Jermayn McPherson drawings.
Yeah.
I enjoy his artwork. And now I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed, but there's two bad guys that I recognize from Lee Falk and Cy Barry's stories. Now, we're not going to make mention of their names or what story it is because we're going to do a competition about this. All right. So we've got some Phantom themed t-shirts that we need to get rid of. So now, did you recognize these two people?
Certainly the one that's on the page that's currently on YouTube. Absolutely on the right-hand side there. And there's a hint. You should go to YouTube. I'm not telling you in the podcast.
Yeah. And then what about this guy?
That would be the less so. That didn't jump out to me.
Yeah. So the competition will be that we will post these images and then you're going to have to figure out the names of these people and what the story they actually appeared in.
The other thing worth noting, and it's not part of the competition, but the pose of the Phantom on page 165, you were just on there, page 165, middle left. That's a very that's the one. Very Cy Barry. I think that's a pose that was used in the Drummer of Timpani, where he's listening to hearing the drums coming across, and it's a similar pose to that. So that's an example of the sort of thing we're talking about. There's other poses that Jermayn pays homage to.
Look, I enjoy the story. It's very Phantom-like. He's doing this, his action. Man of little words, but then when it comes to the point of showing care and tenderness, you see that also.
And superhuman strength, because the ability to
carry
hold
it,
crate with a rhinoceros in it while your parachute snaps your terminal velocity, that is incredible. He's got some forearm grip strength like you would not believe, this man. I have slightly pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but a fun story nonetheless.
But it's fragile, so you got to take care of it. And look, it's a great way of ending the comic. And I know we've got the article which we'll quickly discuss as well, but it feels like I remember once I did a chef's table dinner type of thing on a cruise where you have like 6 meals, and then at the end you have like some sorbet or something which like cleanses your mouth, getting ready for like the next course, and it kind of feels like that. It's like a little light, all like your cheese and crackers at the end of your big meal or something, where it just kind of finishes you off and just gives you that that nice little warm feeling, and like, oh, that was nice. I enjoyed that little ending. It's not something heavy. You're not reading a Vietnam story or the Kiss of Death or the ghost story where the Phantom's in water drowning. This is a nice fluffy way of ending the comic.
Yeah, it's we've talked about the stories, but the actual composition of the whole book and the structure, the order of stories that they've gone through, that hasn't happened by chance. Dudley's thought that through, and I 100% agree with you. I think that the Dean Rankin filler between the two part one stories, even the fact that those were both in the middle of the book, finishing with this lighter story, absolutely. It's a what do they call it? A degustation. So
what did you think of the Frew Publications History by Kevin Patrick?
Look, I thought that was really interesting, especially coming on the back of our conversation with Jermayn McPherson and Daniel Best about Peter Chapman, which we've had recently. We talked a lot about Frew stories and Frew comics from early days. It absolutely reminds us that while this is the 75th anniversary of Frew, and most people would know Frew for their Phantom comics, they've actually got a pretty rich history in their first 15 or 20 so years of existence of publishing a lot of other titles. And so it was really, it was great to go back and have Kevin Patrick provide a pretty substantial and extensive collection or a reminder of what all of those were.
And I like the index as well. I thought the index for me really was like, oh, wow, have they really published that many stories?
That was enlightening, wasn't it? To go, well, that's a lot of different titles that they published. And again, most of those would be in the first 15 or 20 years of this 75-year history. But it just does give you a bit of a picture as to why Glenn might be keen in giant size, Glenn Ford, in giant size to bring some of these titles back, because they're an important part of Frew history.
Yeah. And they also, and a lot of them, they don't have to pay license fees like the Phantom as well. Now, it's worth making mention that David Budds, via Trevor, informed us that it looks like Kevin might have missed the Mandrake series from the 1990s in the index. But look, he does make mention that, I think, where does it say? While every effort has been made to ensure the accuracy of this listing, the lack of records and the erratic titling and numbering practices of the publisher of the era makes this list a flawed document, but interesting historically. So they basically say, look, we haven't got this right. There's going to be some missing.
When you listen to the when we get the chance to listen to the Peter Chapman podcast, you get a bit of an indication as to why it's so difficult to track down those records, because fair to say they didn't have the filing systems in the 1950s that we might have today. You can't go to the Google Drive and just draw back out everything that you published.
And this story here, and I'm not now, obviously this is just coincidence, but this here, the green skeleton, actually gets quite a bit of a mention in the podcast as well. And the story behind it, maybe the reason why that got created to upset a few churchgoers. So hopefully that will tease people to want to listen to that.
Absolutely.
But look, it's a great addition from Kevin to be able to include that, and a great addition to the comic.
100%. And again, to have it all in colour, we've said that the whole way through, but to have the old Frew covers, whatever the title, whether it's the Falcon, Angel Brigade, the Phantom Ranger, which was huge, Planet Man, Suicide Squad, a bunch of the more modern Frew Crew covers as well, Green Skeleton you've mentioned. I'm so pleased that they were able to be published in colour as well. In black and white, they wouldn't be half of what they jump out at the page here.
All right, so last question about this. Do you have a favourite story? Is it The Kiss of Death? Is it Undergrowth?
Oh, gee, they're all good though, aren't they? The Slavers, the sequel to the Slave Traders is really well written. The Sing Raiders, I think that, as I said, Andreas Eriksson has created potentially a template for what a 22nd Phantom looks like. It's a really clever story. He shows that he knows the whole thing. Ghosts of Ships Past, I love the way that brings Kid Phantom into the real Phantom universe, and we both talked about what a fun story it is, both of the creators enjoying that one. Undergrowth, I said at the time, was potentially my favourite. Kiss of the Devil, I can't wait to read that in the next episode. I actually will be ripping over my subscription cover envelope, when it arrives to see the second half and how that pans out. Phantom in Vietnam, I'm well and truly on the record. I know, stop looking at your watch, Germ. On the record saying Phantom Vietnam series is a favourite of mine. Maybe, I don't know, maybe in the context of this book, To Rack and Ruin at Gravelines doesn't quite stand up, but part of the bigger picture, it's a huge part of the Phantom story, which is why we want to see it in its own standalone book. And the box has got its own unique elements. So, no, I don't have a favourite story. You pick one out of those, Germ, because I can't.
Top three will be Undergrowth, the Sing Raiders, and probably the Kiss of the Devil. But it is very hard. But then,
Shane Foley, not in the top three. That's what Jermayn said.
But I've said in the podcast, and I'll say it again, this Shane Foley story is top 3 of the sequel stories that have been written by the Team Frew crew.
You think it's safe that this is going to feature heavily in our favourite Frew issue of the year?
I think it's almost not even worth having that competition, that option. I think it's, it will be 90% will vote this as their best Frew issue.
Oh, it's going to take something very special in the Christmas special to beat that for mine. It's an incredible volume. One of the best Phantom books that's come out for a long, long time.
I would say that I have not been excited with anticipation for a Frew comic like this since probably the Phantom War annual. And that was when we first got an annual that actually had a theme, had new stories in it, had a really good cover, and stuff like that. That I was really excited about that. I was more excited about this. Probably the last time I was that excited, I would have been 13. And that was Frew number 1125, which was an annual back then. I had been a Phantom fan for probably like an addict Phantom fan for probably about 2-3 months. And I skipped my sister's birthday party and stayed in the car and read the annual during the party. Now, it meant not hanging out with 10 or 11-year-old girls, so that, a comic was much better option than that. But yeah, that was, that's kind of like where I am on my excitement levels.
So is that also reading it? Because that's the anticipation you're talking about. Has it held up to that anticipation once you got it?
Yes. Yeah. I took half a day off work to read it. Actually took holiday pay, so I thought, screw this, I am not working. I put in some holiday pay and I gave this a read.
Unreal. Well, Dudley, if you're listening, thank you for putting this out. To Glenn and to Renee, if you're listening, thank you for continuing the tradition of Frew, making sure that we were able to get to 75 years, because back in, 2013 or 15 or whatever it was, we thought perhaps Frew was done. So to get to 75 years is pretty sensational, and to celebrate it in this fashion. Look, if you're this far through and you haven't gone and read the bloody book yet, go and do so, because you must. You just must.
All right, we better wrap this up before it becomes a 2-hour podcast.
It was going to be snappy, we said.
Good try.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jerm, for joining us. Steve, I would love to have heard your thoughts. I know that
it would have been a 2-hour podcast if he was involved.
No doubt. Look, as Jerm said, the social media, hit us up. There's been a bunch of questions we've had. We've had a bunch of opinions. If you concur, if you disagree, hit us up, whether it's in the comments on YouTube or, DMs on Instagram, slide into our Snapchat. I don't know how it works, but Jerm's all across it. He'll reply to whatever you send him. chroniclechamber@gmail.com is the best way, because that's the long form email. We'd love to hear from you there. Thanks very much for tonight, Jerm. I've really enjoyed that. And I hope the listeners have as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Listeners, thank you for listening to us. We wouldn't do this if you weren't listening to us. For myself, enjoy. If you're an overseas fan, dig it out, get a copy, go to Frew, get an Australian to send you a copy. From myself, happy fans.
And from me, a quick shout out to my son who got me this awesome Phantom shirt for Father's Day. Thanks very much, Gus. Love your work. Happy Phantoming.